What's going on, guys? We got another video today. This one we're jumping in to cell structure and function, right? Let's get after it. All right, so what is a cell? A cell is the smallest living thing. Isn't that crazy? Smallest living thing, right? And cells make up all other living things. So all of the living things are either made of one cell or a bunch of cells, right? And if you remember to another video we shot, we talked about the characteristics of all living things, right? There's like something like 8 characteristics. Must be able to reproduce, excrete waste, exchange gases, move, all those different things, right? A cell can do all of those. So a cell is alive, right? We can go smaller than a cell, but if we start going smaller than a cell, it's not a living thing anymore, right? We can talk about atoms and molecules. Those are smaller than cells, but they're not alive, right? So a cell is the smallest living thing that makes up all other living things, right? So we're gonna write that down. A cell is the most basic unit of all living things. A cell is the most basic unit, or like building block, basic unit or building block of all living things. Pretty cool. Cells are pretty phenomenal, guys. We're made of trillions of cells. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about it in a minute. All right, so cell is the smallest basic unit of all living things. So basic unit or building block, right? Whoop. But there are two types of cells that we need to talk about. There are cells that are prokaryotic cells, and we have eukaryotic cells, right? So we're going to differentiate between the two. A prokaryotic cell is a single cell, one cell all by itself that is living and doing its own thing, right? These are things like a bacteria. Like a bacteria is one cell, and it's an organism all on its own. It's just one cell. It's a prokaryotic organism. So prokaryotic cells are make up single-celled organisms like bacteria. Okay. Single cellular, single cell, right? And something to point out is prokaryotic organisms and prokaryotic cells have no membrane-bound organelles. So what's an organelle? Well, if you think of a human being, we have organs in our body, right? We have a heart, we have a brain, we have a liver, we have a stomach, we have all these organs in our body that do these jobs to make sure we maintain homeostasis, right? That equilibrium so we don't get too out of whack, right? Cells are so small, they're so tiny and microscopic, you need a microscope to see them. They don't have organs like a heart, but they have organelles, like tiny organs, right? We're going to talk about well, not all, but most of the organelles we find inside cells. But the thing, prokaryotic cells don't have these organelles. They don't have membrane-bound organelles. A membrane, guys, is just like an outside barrier, like a protective coat, right? Prokaryotic cells, no membrane-bound organelles. No membrane-bound organelles, right? No membrane-bound organelles. So my example, EX for example, is like a bacteria. Right? A bacteria is a prokaryotic cell. So here's my drawing of a bacteria, right? We've got the DNA. This is my DNA right here. Let's change colors here. Whoop. This is the DNA that's just floating around inside the bacteria, right? Just floats around inside the bacteria, not like closed up in an organelle, right? So prokaryotic, single-celled organism like a bacteria, no membrane-bound organelles, just has DNA floating around inside. All right, that's a prokaryotic cell. But then what's a eukaryotic cell? That's what we're made of. That's what the great giant redwoods of California are made of. That's what the tiny tomato plant in your backyard's made of, right? They're made of multiple eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles and make up multicellular organisms. We're multicellular. We're made of trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. Same with huge trees, same with the fish in the ocean, same with the whale. All other more complex living organisms are made of eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotic cells, okay, make up multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms. Right? Make up multicellular organisms, right? Us, like all those examples I just gave. Multicellular meaning more than one cell. Multicellular, all right? So these have membrane bound organelles. Have membrane-bound organelles, guys. So remember, I said a bacteria, a prokaryotic cell, just has DNA floating around inside. Eukaryotic cells actually have a bunch of organelles. So remember, organelle, think means tiny organ, right? So they don't have heart, liver, lungs. They have something called the nucleus. They have something called the endoplasmic reticulum. They have something called the central vacuole if you're talking about a plant cell. We're going to talk about those next. But remember, eukaryotic cells are going to be things like, I'm going to write EX. These are going to be our plants and animals, right? These are going to be our plants and animals. They're made of multicellular, or they are multicellular organisms made of trillions or hundreds of thousands or whatever, tons of cells, right? Now let's talk about some of these organelles that they have inside of them. All right, so we talked about prokaryotic, eukaryotic, but now we're going to focus just on eukaryotic, and we're going to talk about the plant cells versus animal cells. Remember, both of these guys are eukaryotic organelles. They're both eukaryotic organelles that have, eukaryotic cells that have organelles. Sorry, thank you. And here's my drawing. Here's a drawing of a plant cell. Here's a drawing of an animal cell. If we look on the inside, we're going to see all these tiny organs or these organelles that they have. We're going to talk about which ones they share, which ones they have in common, right? And which ones are unique to just plant cells and which ones are unique to only animal cells. And why would there be differences? Let's talk about it. That's a great question. All right, so let's start with what they have in common. So both plant cells and animal cells have something called the nucleus. Nucleus. Right? The nucleus is like the brain of the cell, right? It controls all the cell's activity. It has the DNA inside, and it controls everything that the cell does. The nucleus is like the brain. So here's my nucleus here in the plant cell, right? Whoop, nucleus. You find right here, this is in the plant cell, but it's also in an animal cell, right? It's like the brain, right? It really controls all the cell's activity. The second thing that they both have in common is something called a nucleolus. So this is a black dot inside. Here's a nucleolus, right? That's just inside of the nucleus, and that makes something called ribosomes, which we'll talk about in a second. So they both also have something called nucleolus. The nucleus makes ribosomes. Right? So nucleolus is inside of the nucleus, or the brain of the cell. Remember, the DNA is found inside the nucleus, wrapped up in chromosomes. Nucleolus makes these things called ribosomes. Both plant and animal cells also have ribosomes. So ribosomes, guys, are right here. These red dots, these are our ribosomes. Okay, you notice there are red dots over here in the animal cell as well. Those are our ribosomes. All right, and ribosomes are in charge. They're like the protein factory. They build and make proteins. So both plant and animal cells have ribosomes. Right, protein factory. Right, they build proteins. Proteins are really important because proteins go out of side of the cell and go do really specific jobs for the body and give you the traits that you have, like your eye color, hair color, and all these different things. We'll talk more about proteins and DNA and all that stuff in my DNA structure and function video, and maybe when we talk about transcription and translation and stuff, right? All right, so ribosomes are the protein factory. All right, and then a plant cell and animal cell also have something called the endoplasmic reticulum. What? That's a crazy long word. What is it? Well, the endoplasmic reticulum are these like blue squiggly lines that we find around the nucleus. Endoplasmic reticulum, guys, right? Here we have it right here. Is like the highway. You can think of it like the highway of the cell, right? It kind of transports things throughout the cell. So endoplasmic reticulum, endoplasmic reticulum. It's the highway. It's the highway of the cell, right? It really transports everything through the cell. There's actually two types of endoplasmic reticulum. There's the smooth ER. This is usually abbreviated ER for endoplasmic reticulum. There's the smooth ER and the rough ER. What's the difference? Great question. The difference is the smooth ER doesn't have ribosomes attached, right? Remember these red dots? Those are ribosomes. Smooth ER makes lipids or like fats. The rough ER actually has the ribosomes attached. But for the most part, guys, just think endoplasmic reticulum really is the highway. It kind of sends things throughout the cell, right? And where does it send it? right? If ribosomes are making proteins that are getting sent through the cell by endoplasmic reticulum, it sends it usually to something here called the Golgi apparatus. So they both share something called the Golgi body or apparatus. And you think of the Golgi apparatus as the mail center, right? So if we have the ribosomes are the factory making the proteins, the endoplasmic reticulum is the highway sending them throughout the cell. They send them to the Golgi apparatus, which actually is the mail center. So the Golgi apparatus here, right, is the mail center. What they do is they package the proteins. Once they get there, they really fix the proteins and get them into the shape they need to get in, and then they send them out of the cell to go do the jobs they need to do in your body, right? So pretty cool. We've got kind of like the factory that builds the proteins. They send them through the endoplasmic reticulum to the Golgi apparatus, which actually sends them out of the cell, like the mail center, packages them up, get them ready to go. Another thing they both have is this guy right here. This guy is called the vacuole. So they both have something called vacuole. Oh shoot, did I spell this right? Vacuole. I did not. Oh, there we go. Vacuole. So vacuole is in charge of storage, but there is a difference here. Plant cells only have one vacuole. It's actually called the central vacuole. See how humongous it is here? Look how huge that is. That's because the central vacuole is in charge of storing like water and waste products or storage products, right? If you ever seen a plant with like leaves that are like wilted and like kind of falling down, that's because their central vacuole is not filled up, right? It's not filled up with a lot of water, all right? So that's in plant cells, but in animal cells, right? So we got a central vacuole here in plant cells, but in animal cells, they have a bunch of just little vacuoles. They don't have like one central vacuole. They don't have one really huge one. It's got a couple small ones floating around in the cell, all right? And the next one we got to talk about is right here. These guys are like probably the most famous organelle out of all organelles within a cell, and that is the mitochondria. Mitochondria. All right, and why is this the most famous one? Because you probably heard this phrase before. The mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Yes, that's like super famous. I don't know, every 7th grade student is always told that. That's because the mitochondria are the site of cellular respiration. This is where they make energy. So I think mitochondria, right, they make energy for the cell. All right, now the last one we have to talk about that they both have in common is something called the cytoplasm or cytosol. I'm gonna write cytosol. Ooh, almost went green on you guys. Let's go cytosol or cytoplasm. Cytoplasm. All right, the cytoplasm, it's tough to draw this one. Guys, I actually haven't even labeled this, but the cytoplasm is like a jelly-like fluid that's inside of all these cells and it keeps everything in place. So actually this cell is filled with like a gel or a jelly, and same with this, it's filled with a jelly. So it's like kind of the empty space. This is the cytosol, it's all around here, right? And it holds all these organelles in place, right? It's this jelly-like fluid, right? That's the cytoplasm. All right, we talked about a lot, guys. We talked about all these ones that have in common, but you noticed there are some differences. So let's talk about those differences. We already mentioned one, okay? A plant cell, one difference is, okay, they have a central vacuole. Only one central. Sorry guys, let's go green because we're going plant cells here. How about central vacuole? Central vacuole, right? Only has plant cells only have one. Remember, animal cells have a couple little ones, right? But something else you got to notice, guys, is plant cells are usually rectangular in shape. See how this guy's a rectangle, and this guy's more of like a circle or like a kind of amorphous. That's because plant cells or plants, they don't have bones, guys. So how do they stand up so straight? It's because they have a cell wall. So plant cells have a cell wall that's made of a polypeptide called cellulose. Cellulose. Right, so they have a cell wall, right? The cell wall, think structure, gives it its shape. Cell wall gives it its shape, right? They don't have bones, Plants don't have bones, so they need to keep that rigid shape, and they do that with a cell wall that's really strong. So right here, guys, is our cell, is our cell wall. Right? You notice this all the way along the outside is a cell wall. Kind of gives it the structure, gives it its shape. Sorry guys, the last thing they both share in common, I forgot to mention this, is they have a cell membrane. Both plant and animal cells have a cell membrane, right? And this is like the gate. Okay, it's like the gate. Cell membrane lets things into the cell and out of the cell. It's a selective boundary. So opens the gate to let things in, opens the gate, lets things out, or keeps it closed, right? So in an animal cell, in a plant cell, we have a cell membrane here. Okay, this is found on the inside of the cell wall, right? Still needs that protective gate. And an animal cell, here's our cell membrane here, right? All the way around the outside, lets things in and out of that cell, all right? Something also unique to plant cells is they have a cool organelle called the chloroplast. And the chloroplast makes energy, right? So you guys probably know that plant cells do photosynthesis. Plants do photosynthesis, right? They take carbon dioxide out of the air, convert that with solar energy, if it's light energy, to make glucose, which is sugar, food, and also oxygen. So chloroplast is a site of photosynthesis. Here's our chloroplast here. You guys see it here? Right? It's this green organelle filled with this green pigment called chlorophyll. We'll talk a lot more about this when we actually do our photosynthesis video. And they have these thylakoids, these little disc-like structures that are stacked on top of each other, capture sunlight energy, right, and make energy for the cell. Something to clarify is that cells, plant cells, do both photosynthesis. They use the chloroplast during the daylight to make a lot of energy, but they also use that mitochondria. Remember the powerhouse of the cell? They do cellular respiration usually at night when they're not getting a lot of sunlight, right? So they have two ways to make energy. Versus animal cells, we can't do photosynthesis. We don't even have chloroplasts. We only have mitochondria. We don't have chloroplasts, right? So that's kind of unique to plant cells. So then let's go over to animal cells. So the plant cell has that cell wall to give it that shape and that structure. Animal cells only have a cell membrane. They're usually like circular in shape, right? Or don't really have much of a shape. So if you remember from our lab when we looked at our cheek cells, right? They're kind of all different shapes. That's because there's no cell wall. Only have a cell membrane. Only have cell membrane. Right? Only have a cell membrane. Why only a cell membrane? Why not a cell wall? Because we got bones, right? We got bones that give us our structure, let us stand up straight. We don't need a cell wall, right? But plants need that cell wall for shape, for structure, all right? And then, no cell wall, only cell membrane. So I'm just gonna write to clarify, no cell wall. No cell wall, and no chloroplast. Right? We don't have chloroplast, we can't do photosynthesis, we don't have a cell wall in our cells. Those are animal cells, those are plant cells. Remember, what type of category of cell do these fall into? That's right, eukaryotic cells make multicellular organisms versus prokaryotic cells like a bacteria is one cell. All right, guys, so we talked about a lot. We talked about all the tiny little organs inside these cells, inside eukaryotic cells that do specific jobs. We talked about the nucleus, the brain. Nucleolus makes the ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins, they're the factory, protein factory. Endoplasmic reticulum, remember, is this blue squigglies. They're like the highway, send those proteins around. Golgi Apparatus is like the mail center, packages the proteins to release. Outside of the cell, mitochondria make energy, powerhouse. Vacuole, one central vacuole in a plant cell. A handful of vacuoles in the animal cell, storage. Cytoplasm is like the jelly-like fluid that everything sticks around in. Cell membrane is a protective barrier to the gate. Plant cells have a cell wall and chloroplast. Animal cells do not. Hopefully this was helpful. There's a lot. Remember guys, work hard, get smart, and I'll see you guys next time.